Hi, everybody. I'm Danielle, Paige, and welcome to Y'all Fest. I am so excited to be here and to have these amazing guests with me. I know that you guys are all used to being at Y'all in Charleston, but this year we are doing it from home. I guess that everything is from home right now. So usually you were there for us to help you understand our stories. This year, we're helping you write your own stories. Today's panel is Witches, Villains, and Vampires. And I just want to start off by introducing our guests and having them tell them a little bit about their books, because that's kind of the way we do it, y'all. Can we start with Holly Black?
Hi, I'm Holly Black. I write contemporary fantasy, often about fairies. My most recent book that is coming out is an illustrated novella called How the King of Elfhame Learned to Hate Stories, and it's out on the 24th of this month.
Yay!
Zoraida, Córdova.
Hi, everybody. My name is Zoraida Córdova. I'm the author of the Brooklyn Bruja series. The third and final book, Wayward Witch, came out this year. I'm also the author of the duology the duology Hollow Crown. And I have a middle grade called The Way to Rio Luna. And I'm the co-editor of Vampires Never Get Old, 10 Tales with Bite.
Caleb.
Hi, I am Caleb Roehrig, and I'm the author of The Fell of Dark. I don't have any copies of the book with me because I am abroad right now. But it's the story of a chaotic gay goofball in the Chicago suburbs who, unfortunately for planet Earth, is the last thing standing between humankind and the vampire apocalypse. And if he can get it together, maybe the planet will be saved.
I love it. Kass Morgan.
Hi, I'm Kass Morgan. I'm the author of the 100 series, which was the inspiration for the CW show of the same name. And most recently, I am the author of The Ravens with
I have that one.
which is just the coolest thing. Dream come true. This came out last week. And The Ravens is about a secret coven posing as a sorority at Westerly College in Savannah.
And we had so much fun writing it. I don't know if I actually said my name, Danielle Paige. Anyway, you guys, to get started, I wanted to ask you about your writing. How do you choose what you decided to write, and do you ever scare yourselves when you do? And you can start in any order.
Scare ourselves, like how bad our first drafts are, or like scare ourselves with our content.
I think our writing takes us in very dark places. Do you ever? I mean, Holly, you go super dark. Is that just like very comfortable for you? Do you ever think you've taken that guy's heart out? Like, are you aware of the audience when you're writing? Like, how do you strike that balance?
So I'm scared of everything. Like, I'm terrified. I don't watch horror movies. I'm absolutely petrified of zombies. Like, if you make the zombie noise and come at me, I'm legitimately frightened. And so I think, but I'm not frightened when I'm writing, because what I'm writing out of is that sense of like, here are a whole bunch of things that scare me. You know, I think people often assume that I like a lot of things that actually terrify me.
That is so funny. I would never guess that. Caleb?
Yeah, actually, what I find is that being in the driver's seat helps put a lot of it creates a buffer zone between me and the subject matter. I can write about really sad things. I can write about really dark things. I can write about really tragic things, and it doesn't really affect me because I feel like I am the painter and these are my tools. I'm trying to make. I can tell. Or I feel like I can tell if it's going to have an emotional impact on the reader, but I guess in some ways that I feel very like satisfied by that. Maybe I'm a psychopath. I'm gonna make people scared.
You're
Great
right.
writers have to be. You've got to make your characters suffer, make the readers suffer.
Yeah, I think it depends. It depends on the character I'm writing about. For instance, what is my character's fear, right? What is their emotional bruise? As my co-host of Deadline City, Danielle, calls it, right? She calls it the emotional bruise. And I think about that because if it's the same emotional bruise that I have, right? Like we all have like our certain traumas. And And so if it's the same thing, then it sucks having to relive that in your own fiction, because fiction is supposed to be, it is an escape for the reader, but for yourself, it's a confrontation. And that sucks. For in some instances. And if you're the kind of person who has like no tragedy or trauma in your life, then like, I don't know what you write about. So, I think for fantasy specifically, like I look at what's my character's sadness, and then I sink into it, and it like I'm like a very moody writer, so I like don't really talk to people when I'm working.
Yeah, so you actually feel everything. That's cool, though.
Yeah, we're like 5 minutes in, and I feel like I've learned something already. I love that phrase, emotional bruise. So in my editor life, I'm always asking my authors about their characters, emotional conflict. But like emotional bruise is, I think, much more useful, because conflict is something you can sort of push down and ignore. A bruise is something that everything is going to react to. And as you go through the world, everything is going to put pressure on it in varying degrees. So thank you, Zoraida and Danielle. You've totally changed the way I think about my job.
No, I love that. It's like, that's what's at the heart of your story, and that actually creates your horror when there is horror.
Can I say that Kass is my editor for my middle grade, and she would make me be meaner to my character.
I can totally see that. I'm always, for me, I'm always like, do I take that heart out? Like I go too far, and like Kass was writing something recently, and I was like, I really love that. Why don't we do that? That's super dark. I love the dark things. So.
Yeah, your lonely orphan doesn't miss his sister enough.
I
feel like a little bit more.
So what is it about?
Oh, Holly has her hand raised.
Sorry, yes, I can't, because my box is on top of your box, so I'm going to move my box. Yeah, there we go. Now I can see you.
I just want to say that I thought that Zoraida bringing that up, the idea of the emotional bruise, really brought up a thing that does scare me. Like, I think that is scary. Like, it's not really scary to write about people's hearts being ripped out, but it's super scary to like really get in deep with your character. And like, there's a level of vulnerability to it. There's a level of exposure. There's a level of embarrassment. I actually think that is super scary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I think that's kind of the root of a lot of these stories. What is it about these characters, villains and witches and vampires? Like, why do you feel that we're still telling these stories about them? And what do you do to make them fresh and new when there's been 10 million vampires, witches, and werewolves, and like, why are they still here, basically? What do you think?
I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, because when Natalie Parker and I launched Vampires Never Get Old, one of the nuclear the foundation for it was, why are we even bothering with vampires if it's been done so much? And the answer is, like, it hasn't actually been done so much. It's been done by a certain kind of people, right? Like, how many vampires are queer? How many vampires are brown? How many vampires are trans? How many vampires, so like, what is actually the things that are left in the canon are almost still infinite, because we haven't told all the stories. And so I think that's why the title Vampires Never Get Old, which is our anthology title, just makes so much sense. One, because I came up with it when I was like, I was just playing around, and I thought it would be funny, and I didn't think that they would let me keep it. But also because it's true, like, it is fundamentally true that, like, they never get old, they don't age, and also they reappear in our literature during different times, right? Whether they're a metaphor for xenophobia, where they're a metaphor for, like, I forgot what Anne Rice, her metaphor was. It was something like, I don't remember. I don't even want to go there. But
during the HIV epidemic.
Yes, it was. Yeah. Or whether it's a metaphor when you're like, I spent so much time reading teen vampire books in the 90s and the late 90s and early 2000s, and those were all about loneliness, right? Like, orphan teenage kids with like the hot vampire boyfriend that can't die. He can't leave you, right? Like this is the one constant, the new constant in your life, even though he's 1,000 years old. And that's to me why like these characters, like the darkness is so appealing, specifically in your teen years. And I have a lot of diaries to prove it.
I love that. Holly,
I-
you like this girl in Cold Town made me think like was one of the first like female vampires that just like we're so used to seeing guys as vampires and the hot, sexy vampire. I remember reading your book and being so happy that this book existed. Did you always have her with you? Like when did you come up with that one?
So when I think about vampire, so when you look at the sort of old folklore about them, they're hideous, right? And they still come out of our anxiety around death. And one of the things that's been fascinating to me over time is watching the way that we manage our anxiety by making them first like more civil, right? Then they become first, they start out sort of these kind of bestial things that crawl back from the grave. And then they become like sort of your civilized Dracula, like we can, chat it up. And then they become like hot. And I feel like we have this evolution of trying to manage our anxiety by like having sex with it. And then that's sort of the evolution of our relationship with
Holly did write the best vampire kissing scene in Coldest Girl in Cold Town.
Oh, I'm so happy you said that. I love that.
What about you, Caleb? What do you think? Why do these characters? Why are they stuck around? What did you do differently with yours? Because I haven't read it yet.
Oh, well, so this year I released both a vampire story and a werewolf story, and I did research on both. And what's striking to me is that there is
I read your werewolf story.
Oh, you did? Oh, thanks. But yeah, there's an extensive folklore history across like hundreds of cultures around the world. They all have these ancient stories about revenants, vampires, the creatures coming back from the dead. So it is, I mean, there is a lot of really fertile ground for stories. I mean, everybody on some level can connect to this idea of, that it really is. It's this idea of it's exploring your fear of death. It's exploring your fear of the unknown. It is a metaphor for the things that we try to bury and that come back to bite us, so to speak. So I think that there's always going to be, they will always be useful metaphorically and as sort of, I don't know, ingredients for a tasty story. For me, when I went into this, see, when I first came up for the idea that would eventually become this, it was a decade ago, and I had completely missed the boat on sort of writing a vampire story. So I sort of backburned. I kind of liked the idea that I had come up with, and I saved it. And then it was actually when Renee Adia announced The Beautiful, I was like, oh my gosh, this might be it. Like this could be my one chance to get this story out into the light of day, so to speak, maybe the moonlight. So I dug the story up, and I was like, I looked at it, and I was like, I am gonna blow everybody's socks off, and I read it over, and it was really terrible. So I kind of started over again, and I said, I'm not going to shock anybody. I'm not going to surprise them. There isn't going to be some big twist. Oh my gosh, it's vampires. By now, people, you've got Twilight, you've got the Vampire Diaries, you've got everything. Everybody knows all the tropes. So I said, if I can't subvert the trope, I'm going to queer it. So I have the love triangle, but it's a gay love triangle, and it's different, I think, than what was out there before. And I said, I'm gonna turn all of these tropes into either punchlines, or I'm gonna make them into something that you've seen but you haven't seen this way. So that was my approach. I wanted to write the vampire story that I always wished that I had when I was a teenager.
Well, we were just talking to Amber Benson, which is, I think, airing on IGTV today, about Buffy and Tara falling in love and what a big deal that was. And that's 20 years ago, and that's witches, but it was like that moment. And I feel like we are still waiting for these stories, and just so grateful that you're doing them. I mean, honestly, like it's taking way too long. So yay, vampires. Kass.
Yeah, so interesting, what Caleb is saying, because like vampire, sort of the myth has been sort of almost like straight washed in the 20th century. And I think reclaiming it is almost bringing it back a little bit to the origin myth. Like vampires, I think one of the reasons they were so threatening is that there was a lot of fluidity. You know, they sucked the blood of men, of women. It was this sort of slightly androgynous, sometimes effete figure that really challenged a lot of gender norms in some way. Who gets to be a figure of desire? Who gets to be the one, you know, pursuing victims? And like Dracula is so interesting in that way, how the vampire is sort of coded in ways that it's sort of challenging the social norm. So vampires can be sometimes what we fear, but also something we want to explore in this safe space. So I think that's another reason it's so enduring. And I think that's something you and I wanted to play with in The Raven.
Well, it's interesting that you bring it up, because the first contemporary vampire novel was Sapphic, Carmilla. And I think, yeah, and I think that it really is this sort of, you know, probably back then that, you know, queer coding your villains is an old thing that people have done a lot of, but I really do think that it's sort of there is kind of a parallel in the sense that, you know, you are talking about people who are not they don't have to follow the sort of code of morality of contemporary society because they've been cut off from it. They're already seen as these monsters and these, you know, creatures that are arcane and misunderstood. So, you know, why do they have to listen to Victorian morals? So I think I actually find that it is really useful for that. It is really great territory. And you are right, they did get straight washed, and it's really dreadful. I feel like True Blood did a really good job of sort of digging into sort of the sexiness of vampires and the potential for that.
Totally. And I think, Danielle, that's like something that was really exciting for you when you came up with the idea for The Raven, and something that was so cool to run with, the idea of sort of reclaiming witches, because for so long, you know, witch has been a word that has been used to other women who pose some sort of threat to the social order. And I think we talked about this a little bit in our discussion with Amber. You know, vampires have always been sort of sexy transgression. It's what we as society say you shouldn't do, but like we secretly want to do. But witch is very much like, no, those are, you know, symbolizing fears that we really think could shake the bedrock of our society. You know, women who sometimes refuse to have children or know too much about childbirth or healing or threaten, you know, the social order in some way. And there haven't been a lot of sexy witches. Like that has been a much later development, because I think it's only now we've become really comfortable with women occupying that space. So I love your idea of this sorority of witches, where instead of being relegated to the, you know, outskirts of society, they're the center of it. These are the girls everyone on campus admires, everyone wants to be, and it's because of their witchiness that they are sort of idolized instead of shunned, which was so cool when you came to me with that idea.
Thank you. Well, we really just wanted to play with the idea of also about sororities, which are another like institution that has its own issues, and we wanted to play with the idea that the way with exclusivity and like, what if this world existed wherein it's kind of our fantasy sorority where the girls are chosen strictly on their power, not on any on ethnicity or on gender or like on anything other than on their sexuality. We pick them based on their power, and that worked for us. Everybody, what book was it that sparked your love for these characters? Like, what's your first vampire love, or your first witch love, or your first, like, what was it that like got you to the dark side? Like, I mean, for me, fairy tales, I would say, because I was always in love with a witch and never with the girl that's supposed to get saved. I love Maleficent. I love Dorothy, but I also love the Wicked Witch of the West. Like, I really thought I was so fascinated with the characters that have agency and power. And for me, like those were like my superheroes, in the sense that they were like, they had the things that you wanted in those stories. So what about you guys? What books did this for you?
So when I was a kid, my mother told me that the most frightening book she had ever read was Dracula. And she described the scene where Dracula is like climbing up the wall, and like the sense of wrongness. I was very small, and this was a huge mistake, because if I am a coward now, I was like 300 times more of a coward then. And I'm terrified of this book. So much so that I then took a subset of my Barbie dolls and made them into good vampires so they could protect bad vampires.
Oh my
And
God.
then flash forward, I wound up buying for 25 cents a book at a garage sale called Interview with the Vampire. And I had been primed at that point by my whole life leading me to that moment. And I must have read that book 100 times at night, over and over.
I love that book.
I love it.
Zoraida, okay, Kass. I didn't know who talked first.
I'm trying to think. Like, I've always been sort of drawn to the dark side. I can't really think of a figure. Oh, you know what? I think there's always something about Maleficent in Sleeping Beauty, and it may have just been that she had the best clothes of anyone in the movie, and her lipstick was always on point. But something, she was the only character who sort of showed the full spectrum of human emotion, you know, good and bad. She was, because she was a villain, she was allowed to be envious and jealous and spiteful and want vengeance, and everyone else in the movie has to be good and kind, and those are wonderful qualities, but it's so limiting. You know, if you're going to be a princess, all you can be is patient and sweet and fall in love, and villains seem to have a lot more room to feel the feelings that I was feeling as a kid, and I think a lot of us were.
I love that. Zoraida?
I think that I would not be a writer without vampires, because one of the first books I didn't like reading in elementary school and junior high school because I didn't like the books that were shoved at me. But then I went to the library and I found a book called In the Forests of the Night by Amelia Atwater Rhodes. And when I finished reading the book, it was back when like YA was 150 pages in like a mass market paperback size, and they were like $3. How times have changed. And so I found out that the author was 13 or 14 when she got published, and it was published by Random House. So I was like, oh, I can do this. Like, this is a viable thing that I can do. Like, she's a teenage girl, I'm a teenage girl, and we have nothing in common. That's where it stops. But it's one of those things where it sort of changed my life, and so I started searching in the library. I would go and just type in the computer. I would type in like supernatural words like eclipse or witch or vampire, anything like moon. And so anything that had those words in the title, I would check them out if they were available. And then my mom at a garage sale, she bought me the Lord of the Rings books, and I actually didn't like those because there's just too much exposition. But then the movies came out, and I was like, yes. So like it just like I just became this like fantasy crazed kid where I just hated the real world, and all of these like so these stories were like very formative for me, and of course Tithe by Holly Black. So I have to say that.
You know, actually, I wanted to say something else about Maleficent. Is that another thing that's great about her is she's an outsider with a lot of power. You know, she is a character who is ostracized and looked down on and sort of cut off and viewed as sort of this aberration. But she's really angry and righteously angry, I think. I mean, you know, she goes a little too far, but she has a lot of really righteous anger about the way that she's mistreated. Yeah. And also, you know, for me as a gay boy growing up, I did not fit in with the sort of structure of American masculinity, and that is a way to sort of end up being subject to violence and being picked on and bullied a lot. So I also related to feminine power, and I related to a character like Maleficent who, you know, here are all these people who are towing a line and doing what they're supposed to be doing, and she is not invited to the great big party that everybody's supposed to get to go to, and she's pissed off about it. And, you know, and I could relate to that. I also was sort of obsessed with witches when I was a little kid, and I don't know why. I have all these, before I knew how to write, I was dictating stories to my mom, and she would write them down, and I would illustrate them, and we would staple them together in these little booklets. And I found a bunch of them a few years ago, and I was going through, and I was like, every single one of these ended with a witch. Like suddenly a witch pops out of nowhere and zaps people, and I don't know where that came from, but that was a thing. It was a very common theme for me.
I mean, yeah.
I don't know if Yeah, I don't know if there was like a specific book that got me into like the stuff that what got me into sort of like dark stories was Nancy Drew. Like that is my dad
I
used to
love
read
to hear
Nancy Drew
that.
stories to my family. But as far as like the paranormal stuff, I don't know. I loved ghost stories as a kid. They terrified me, but I loved them.
You know,
Are
when I was a kid, we couldn't afford books, so like we would go to there was like an outlet, like one of those like the stores where they sell things where they like print too many copies of something, like an overstock something. And that's where I would buy books because they were like $2. And I bought like all the Nancy Drew books and anything that looked like it could be supernatural. And when I was 10, I wrote in my diary, "Dear diary, I'm changing my religion from Catholicism to Wicca, but I can't tell my mom."
Oh.
And so like this is the person I have always been as well. Like witchcraft also just just like you, Caleb. I don't know. It's just something about us.
That's right.
I love that. Well, for everyone, we've all kind of mentioned other things, other like TV and film. Were there other touchstones for you when it comes to this stuff? Is there, like we mentioned, Interview with the Vampire is a book, but were there other movies or shows that spoke to you? I'm looking for we get some Q&A, and I'm looking for those while we're talking.
I think for me, a big other influence was that. So it's all how my mom traumatized me. But, she told me our house was haunted. It was like this really old, kind of broken down house that she inherited from my grandmother, and sorry, she inherited from my great grandmother. And she said that when she was a child, she used to play with a ghost in the attic that she called Robbie. And whenever she would lose her keys, she would be like, "Robbie, where are my keys?" There's no good answer. Either she finds them, which means Robbie gave them back. She doesn't find them, which means Robbie's mad. So I spent my whole childhood. She was all into witch stuff. There was a lot of tarot cards, a lot of Ouija boards. Spent my whole childhood terrified. And like also believing, like if you scratch the surface of me, I believe because I believed as a kid.
Yeah, I think that there's something for me as well, like just the growing up being like Latina. You know, my family's from Ecuador. I'm from Ecuador, and there's just something about my mom carries the finger bone of her grandfather in a red velvet bag because it's because so it's like her protection, like he's gonna protect her from like getting into a car accident or something like that. And my grandmother talks to saints and believes that they're like son, I forgot, son something, Saint Anthony, like where I also lost my this, like bring me back, like help me find my thing. And so when I was in college, I was like, I guess like that my grandmother said like he was my patron saint because he's like the patron saint of lost causes or something like that, because I didn't want to get married, and so like it's like people from Latin America have a lot of these like superstition is part of our culture. So like I also had no choice but to believe in ghosts and believe in spirits and believe that saints are actually like waiting there to help you find your car keys or something like that.
What about you? Do you have any like witchy or like supernatural experiences? I know that Kass kind of has one.
Yeah, I mean, just like ghost stuff. When I went to visit my grandmother in my paternal grandmother that I'm named after in Ecuador, and it was like the driest day, no breeze, and we're walking to the cemeteries in Ecuador. Like they're stacked, they're not underground, kind of like in New Orleans, and we're walking, and I like all of a sudden like we're walking to her grave, and I feel somebody touch my face. Like I feel like a caress on my hair, just brush back, and there's no wind, so I like it couldn't be like, oh, there's a breeze. No, it's like, and so I would like to think it was my grandmother, but it could also be just like a random ghost who's just like, get out of here.
Wow. Caleb, Kass, do you guys have any witchy experiences?
I don't know if I have. I don't really know. I will say that twice I've had an experience where a loved one has died, and I had a dream shortly thereafter about them that felt very much like someone coming to say goodbye. And who knows, that could have been my subconscious sort of working through some issues. But like I said, they were things that felt very real to me. So I like to believe it.
Kass, what about you? I know that you spent some time in a haunted place. Maybe she go first. Okay.
Yeah, I think I don't know. Are you referring to the haunted hotel I stayed in Savannah? Because Danielle and I wrote a book set in Savannah where I have never been, and I thought that I could just do it all through Google image search and YouTube and like people's vacation photos, and that was wrong. And I wrote this first draft, and Danielle's was full of all this rich imagery, and all I knew was like live oaks and Spanish moths, and like every time the characters walked outside, I'm like, this is so boring. So I got on a plane, took an emergency research trip to Savannah, and just went all in. Ended up staying at the most haunted hotel in Savannah.
Oh my God.
Ambiance. I didn't actually have any ghostly encounters there, but that doesn't really prove or disprove anything to me, because for me the supernatural has always been sort of a way of explaining things that science can't quite explain, but that you sort of know to be true, that there's more in heaven and earth that is dreamt of in our philosophy. Like I have this friend who will always text me like 5 minutes after I get bad news, and maybe it's been 6 months since we've spoken. She has no idea anything's going on in my life, and I just hear from her the moment I need her. And like I absolutely believe it's some sort of like extrasensory perception, but it's based in love. Like I don't think, for me, witchcraft and ghostliness isn't about spookiness. It's sort of this manifestation of our love for our family and friends, and how it can sort of defy physics in some ways.
Yeah.
I love that. So we have a lot of questions from the audience, and I want to get as many as we can in our next 10 minutes. Do you have any favorite tips for writing a great villain? Holly.
I mean, I think letting them be characters, right? Who have not just sort of terrible qualities, but people who have strong motivations and who have things that they love, and who are allowed to be petty. I think all those things make them great characters. I think having a relationship to the protagonist is also really useful, so that the situation is not purely one where you're facing down an antagonist, but and a villain, but somebody where there is often, hopefully a level of complexity to that relationship.
Do you ever, I'm going to just throw these out there and anyone can answer. Do you ever write a villain that you love so much that the character sometimes takes over? I guess you mean, do you ever fall in love with your villains?
In the Hollow Crown duology, book 1, I create this, there's a prince named Prince Castian, and he's the bad guy, and you see him on the page, but you see him in a scene twice, but the rest is sort of like composites of stories about him and how awful he is, and then sometimes like there's conflating information. So it's sort of this, is he evil or is he not? Or is he doing something for XYZ? And then in book 2, I fall in love with him, and I really love who he is as a character and his development. So that is one instance where he sort of took over.
How did you, let's see, has anyone ever had nightmares from one of the scenes or stories you've written? Anyone?
I think is like Holly was saying, you are like working things out, that you're taking your fears and taking them out of you onto the page. So I feel like by the time I write a scene, I've sort of like exercised that demon in some way.
I've used my nightmares I've drawn from my nightmares to put into books. Like I've taken terrible dreams that I've had and I've said, I'm going to put this into the book because it was terrifying. So, but never in the reverse.
Yeah.
Do you guys have, let's see, what do you think about, people want a recommendation of what's your recommendation of your next witch, villain, or werewolf book? Do you have any recommendations?
For like a good villain book?
Yeah.
Forest of a Thousand Lanterns by Julie C. Dow. I have never rooted for somebody to eat hearts as much as I have rooted for uh, the main character of this book. Please read it. It is incredible. It is an origin story for the evil queen in an Asian version of Snow White.
Oh, I want to read that one. That sounds great. Anyone else have any recommendations?
I think apart from Holly's books, the best evil fairy I've ever seen is in Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. The gentleman with the thistledown hair is just one of those villains that he makes your skin crawl, but you sort of want to lean in closer to hear what he's gonna, whisper into the character's ears next. It's this like very compelling combination of like seduction and revulsion, and I've read that book a million times.
I'm late to the party, but I've been reading Marissa Meyer's The Lunar Chronicles, and
Oh my God,
Levana is a very magnetic villain.
Very cool. Do you guys, let's see, do you have any other tips for writing for this genre? Is there something that you want to tell writers that are trying to write a vampire, you're trying to write a werewolf, or you're trying to write your first villain? Is there something that you can, since this is YALLWrite, what is the piece of advice you give?
I think that, we often have anxiety around the idea that this stuff has been done, and it's been done so many times. But I think just in the way that fairy tales can be retold again and again and again, I think actually the familiarity of these pieces allows for a greater amount of experimentation. Like, I think we should, instead of saying, oh, is there anything, should we avoid it because it's been done? No, I think there's actually space to work within it, and that the thing you're bringing to it is your unique point of view.
I love that. Anybody else? We have like 2 minutes, so everybody can answer.
There is, but to build on what Holly was saying, there is so much that is already out there. But they say there's no original stories. It's really just sort of the way that you choose to tell these stories. So my best advice is just consume as much of the media as you possibly can, because you will find inspiration everywhere. So, when I was figuring out what my vampires were going to be like, I drew from a number of sources where I was like, I like this myth, I like that story, I like this. I don't like this one, so that's not getting in there. But I can kind of pick and choose. There's so much to draw from, and I tried to put my own stamp on there too. But, like I said, when I approached it, my whole thought was, a lot of this is stuff that readers are going to have seen or they're going to be expecting. So I'm going to try to meet them somewhere in the middle.
Zoraida.
Oh, I think everyone has said everything that I would have said.
Kass?
This is sort of general, not specific to this genre, but don't compare your first, second, third draft to the final books you read that you get in the bookstore, pick up at the library. I think people forget how long and hard we work on them. So any book of mine anyone's ever read has been a 5th draft minimum, sometimes more. So it's great to be inspired by your favorite authors, but then put that aside and just allow yourself that time and space to let your story evolve. And sometimes it takes a long time, and that's fine.
I think that is great advice and a good place to end, but we're going to ask one last question. What would you rather be? Which werewolf, vampire, creature of your own choosing? Start, Holly.
Vampire.
Kass.
Witch.
Zoraida.
Vampire.
Caleb.
I'd be a witch.
I want the immortality. Holly. Okay, you guys, thank you so much. This was so much fun. I'm sorry I was late. I was on another chat for Insta Live. You guys, please check out the program all day. We love you guys, and we hope you're okay out there. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.